Star Wars. My childhood was filled with endlessly rewatching the Star Wars movies and playing many of the video games from across the franchise. When it comes to the games that stand out the most in my memory, Star Wars The Force Unleashed is near the top of my nostalgia list. The game nailed so many things that made it impossible to resist for Star Wars fans. To start off with, The Force Unleashed, or TFU as I'll sometimes refer to it as, established a pivotal new character named Galen Merrick, better known as Starkiller. At the time of the game's development, there was a large gap in the lore between episodes 3 and 4 that was ripe for new stories. With the blessing and input of George Lucas, the team at LucasArts sought to fill this void and made Starkiller the secret apprentice of Darth Vader and a key character in the establishment of the Rebel Alliance. The concept for this character is amazing and let LucasArts make something new but still connected to the characters we all love. Playing Starkiller allows us to live out our wildest force-wielding fantasies as his powers are just out of control. A fundamental design tenet established by the development team was that this game was literally about kicking someone's ass with the Force.
What is the core gameplay?
Kicking someone's ass with the Force.
And oh boy, does the game deliver. With the power of the 7th generation consoles, the team could bring this design philosophy to fruition by fusing 3 separate simulation technologies to make a game world that was more reactive than anything gamers at the time had seen. Bark peels off trees, enemies fly away with realistic ragdoll physics, and countless objects can be picked up and thrown with tremendous force. These systems meshed perfectly with the game dialing up force powers to 11, making you feel like the most powerful character to ever exist in the Star Wars universe. While all this sounds amazing, revisiting the game today made it clear that the simulation-driven gameplay can make The Force Unleashed feel cumbersome, and the game lacks the combat depth of its contemporaries. Beyond that, TFU can bring 7th generation consoles to their knees. Fortunately, my playthrough was largely devoid of performance issues as I played the game on Xbox Series X, which brings the resolution up to a native 4K with a more consistent lock to 30 FPS. Later in the video, I'll touch more on the performance and many of the other versions of the game created by external teams for the less powerful platforms. While TFU was always great in my memory, by diving deep into the gameplay, story, and characters, my opinion might have changed. I'll present my findings and opinions throughout the video, and then rank the game on my tier list at the end. For now, let's examine the powers that Starkiller wields and how the player can use them. Star Wars The Force Unleashed is a character action game in the vein of Devil May Cry, God of War, and Bayonetta. God of War clones were commonplace during the Xbox 360 and PS3 generation. However, by leaning into simulation-driven gameplay, The Force Unleashed set itself apart from the others. The speed of combat in TFU does feel slower compared to the formerly mentioned titles, and the general flow of combat is not as smooth. Here, the fastest way to get from one cluster of enemies to another is by dashing. The dash itself doesn't cover much distance, but can be paired with a lightsaber attack, force lightning allowing it to strike distant enemies, or force push, sending Starkiller further and knocking anything out of his path. When it comes to dealing with distant foes, Starkiller has no shortage of options. Force lightning and force pushing excel at dealing with enemies in that medium to close range. The lightning is particularly useful against tough bosses and enemies as it can keep them locked down, giving you a second to breathe. While the force push might seem like a simple move, it's perhaps the most fun power in the game due to its reactive design. The best feeling in the whole game is charging up a powerful force push and nailing a group of enemies. It feels just like getting a strike in bowling.
Nice throw!
For more surgical range attacks, the lightsaber throw is perfect for picking off snipers or enemies that are just out of reach. Enemies and objects can also be picked up and thrown around with the force grip. There's also some variation on this move, as when you're levitating characters, you can shock them, turning them into a lightning grenade, impale them with Starkiller's lightsaber, or blast them into space with a force push. Although he has quite the ranged arsenal, Starkiller lacks the ability to force pull enemies towards him. Yanking a whole group of enemies towards you could have improved the melee combat flow and given players even more tools to use. Abilities like this are commonly seen in other character action games, where the option to pull enemies to you or you to the enemies is often presented. The more mobility tools players get in combat for character action games really makes them tick, as it turns you into a perpetual and stylish death machine. These movement tools are key in keeping your style rank, combo meter, or encounter score high, and the feedback systems here reward players who dedicate themselves to mastering the gameplay. And well, The Force Unleashed lacks this positive feedback loop almost entirely. It may seem like I'm making many comparisons to other games here, but that's only because they've distilled the dopamine hits you get from flashy combat down to a science. The extent of any kind of scoring system you'll see in The Force Unleashed during gameplay is the names of the enemies you take out and the moves you use in the top left corner under your health and force meter. By varying the skills you use in combat, you are rewarded with additional experience points, bringing you closer to the next level. There's no reward or incentive to avoid damage or keep a combo string running. It's just attack variety, and the XP difference isn't even that noticeable. Regarding attack evasion, the player can block incoming attacks by holding down on the left trigger, but Blaster Bolt Reflection is largely automatic and lacks any timing-based parry component. The automatic Blaster Bolt Deflection doesn't start the best, but as you improve the skill, most of the enemy fire from regular grunts won't matter anymore. Starkiller can also dodge in several directions while locked onto enemies, but I almost exclusively use the dash ability to escape oncoming attacks. Since there's not much incentive to make fights as flashy as possible, I typically just resorted to ending them as fast as I possibly could. In areas with ledges, I would spam or charge force pushes to blast enemies off the ledge, which instantly ends combat encounters. Some stronger enemies can also be grabbed telekinetically and then just hurled down a pit or off the stage. A melee combo that can be unlocked early in the game infuses Force Lightning with your lightsaber attacks, and it's really useful against these tougher enemies as it keeps them locked down so they can't fight back against you. There is a decent variety of melee combos here with delayed attack strings and combos that incorporate both lightsaber attacks and the Force. Grabs are available too, and they look pretty cool, but the problem with these moves is that they're easily forgotten, as sending enemies off the edge of the level is much easier. I had to force myself to use some of the combo strings and abilities, and I genuinely really liked some of these attacks, like the combo that launches enemies into an air juggle. Unfortunately, it didn't work against many regular enemies, as the instant I touched them, they'd be dead. This all got to the point where sometimes I would just ignore the enemies in the area and run to the level's objective, as there's nothing really stopping you from doing this. Since Star Wars appeals to a wide audience, I did have the idea that perhaps the developers purposefully dumbed down combat to make the game more accessible, but to counter this train of thought, I reminded myself that games like the Batman Arkham series still have a tight and rewarding combat system, and it also features a feedback system that makes you strive to do better every battle. Just because a game's target audience covers a large age window, it doesn't mean the gameplay has to suffer. When starting The Force Unleashed, Starkiller has access to very few force powers and combat abilities, which makes fighting stale at first. By around the midpoint in the game, all the force powers will be accessible, and players should have accumulated plenty of XP to unlock special moves that sound interesting to them. All the primary force abilities have 3 stages of power, which are progressed with force power spheres. There is a standard progression among most force powers where the second level will allow you to charge the ability to deal more damage, and the third level will raise the strength of the ability overall. Besides the force powers I've discussed already, there is the Force Repulse and Lightning Shield. The Repulse is a useful ability that sends all enemies near you flying away and is just as satisfying to use as the Force Push. The Lightning Shield is more oriented towards improving the player's defenses as it lowers incoming damage, but it can also electrocute nearby enemies. Using the shield expends a ton of force energy, which is typically better spent on eliminating enemies. When fully charging your lightning shield, it will actually put you into energy debt, meaning you can't use any force powers until the bar goes all the way down and starts building back up in the positive direction. New combos and improved character stats are obtained in the same method as upgrading Starkiller's force powers. Combos, stats, and force powers each have a separate tab in the menu and a unique upgrade sphere. These spheres are mainly obtained by leveling up, but can also be gotten from Jedi holocrons and completing subtasks within a level. You'll definitely feel Starkiller grow in power by using these upgrade spheres, and upon completing the game, it will immediately begin a New Game Plus run. For many hours, I was under the impression that there was no level select feature here, but it's actually hidden within the game's pause menu, which is kind of a confusing choice. The glue that's holding the whole experience together here is the combination of the simulation technologies Havoc Physics, Euphoria, and Digital Molecular Matter. While all the simulation tech is awesome, it can make the game feel like more of a tech demo than a gameplay-focused product. Havoc is the underlying physics engine here, and handles the rigid body interactions you see in the game. Euphoria is an animation system that allows for realistic biomechanical AI and was frequently used by Rockstar. This tech lets enemies react realistically when acted upon by external forces. Finally, digital molecular matter, or DMM, allows materials to behave accurately. Metal doors peel back when blasted with a force, glass shatters when objects are thrown through it, and foliage bends organically as characters move through it. The simulation-driven systems in TFU make the game feel a little bit like Breath of the Wild or Tears of the Kingdom, where wild physics interactions make for the most interesting gameplay bits. Those games fully lean into players experimenting with the simulation systems, whereas The Force Unleashed feels like it's caught somewhere between wanting to be a great hack-and-slash game and a game where physics interactions drive the core gameplay. Now on to everyone's favorite topic, customization. There are numerous lightsaber colors to pick from, and with the DLC installed, there are a ton of outfits to wear. To unlock lightsaber colors in some outfits, players must find Jedi holocrons, which are scattered throughout the game's levels. These collectible objects can also reward players with experience points or upgrade spheres, which is always disappointing to see when you're hoping for a new lightsaber color instead. There's a nice variety of saber colors here, and every color comes in 3 variations except for black. There's a typical color crystal, which looks like any normal lightsaber. Then we have the compressed color crystals, which pulse with energy, and finally unstable crystals that give off a hazy glow. The process of changing lightsaber colors is frustrating as the menu system in TFU is quite slow. The clip you see here is sped up, and in it I knew exactly what color I wanted to switch to, but it still took me 14 seconds to open the menu, pick the color, and close it back down, and then get back into the game. There's also lightsaber power crystal customization that offers passive effects which can help players customize their playstyle a bit. Although lightsaber power and color crystals are always unlocked via Jedi holocrons, new outfits for Starkiller are unlocked in a variety of ways. As you progress through the story, Starkiller will wear new apparel in each mission, which unlocks it for use on any other stage. Some outfits can be unlocked from finding Jedi holocrons, and many more are unlocked via punching in the right cheat code. There's a staggering number of costumes between the base game and DLC, and these aren't just clothes. Many of the costumes make Starkiller appear as other characters from the Star Wars universe. Just make sure you know which outfit you want to wear, as picking a costume sends you back to the last checkpoint you hit. It's not just the upgrading and cosmetic menus that are annoying to use, but it's also the amount of time it takes to reload at the last checkpoint when you die. Reload time seems to vary significantly. Sometimes the game would keep the camera on my corpse for a while before cutting away, and occasionally it would immediately switch to the loading screen. It seems like getting killed by environmental hazards triggers the longest load times. This is a very bad case right here, where it took almost 30 seconds for my death till the moment I could actually control Starkiller again. After passing through the loading screen, the level will begin to fade back into existence, but it doesn't let you control Starkiller until the fade is totally finished. This fading process doesn't seem to have a fixed length either, as some loads took far longer than others. Now, you won't be dying a ton here like Dark Souls, but all these annoyances with slow loading and a poor menu system add friction to the game as you fight the poor user experience instead of the actual enemies in the game. The final piece I'll touch on here is the boss battles, as most of them aren't a highlight of the gameplay. The Force Unleashed was designed to make you feel like a superhero, and it feels like because of this, these more methodical duels don't work as well. TFU is at its best when you can go all out on larger groups of enemies with the Force. One major annoyance here is the camera. It's not great in other parts of the game, but during most of the boss fight stages, it's fixed and you don't have a ton of control over it. Bosses tend to keep their guards up constantly, so melee attacks will rarely connect. If I ever got an opening, I'd always try to knock enemies down with a force push, a force repulse, or using the force grip, as when they're prone you can dash over and impale them with your lightsaber, which does massive damage. These fights also end with quicktime events, and failing the QTE usually just makes it start over. I'm glad modern games have moved away from such invasive QTEs, as they often cheapen the feeling of landing the killing blow because it's just a scripted set of events requiring one-button inputs. The takedowns during the QTEs are well choreographed and show the peak of Starkiller's brutality. The takedown Starkiller does on Obi-Wan in particular from the Tatooine DLC is amazing and actually had me laughing because of how absurd it was. Now, having talked about the gameplay at length, let's transition into the story and characters of the game, where I'll also discuss some of the individual boss fights. Despite being the secret apprentice of Darth Vader, I never really got the feeling that Starkiller was a hardened Sith warrior. Even from the beginning of the game, Galen Merrick questions the orders he receives from Vader, but executes them nonetheless, as this is all he's known for years.
Leave no witnesses. Kill everyone aboard, Imperials and Kota's men alike.
As you wish, my master.
It's immediately apparent from his interactions with his training droid Proxy that Galen's true nature does not belong to the dark side. Although his father was killed at a young age before his eyes, the closest thing Starkiller has had to a friend since then is Proxy, who is specifically programmed to try and kill him. This is in stark contrast to Anakin, who trained with the Jedi Order and through years of politics, romance, and other personal relationships was dragged towards the dark side. Galen Merrick hasn't had any of these life experiences, and his journey is nearly the opposite of Anakin's. His relationship with Proxy, Juno, and General Coda, and experiencing the treacherous ways of the Empire turns him to the light. It's not until the Tatooine and Hoth DLC missions, which follow the dark side ending, that Starkiller acts like a true ruthless Sith assassin. There are glimpses of this dark nature in boss takedowns, but in the majority of cutscenes and dialogue, Starkiller finds the good in people's hearts, or is learning right from wrong. George Lucas helped push for this direction as he emphasized the importance of drama in Star Wars. Here, most of the typical Star Wars roles are filled by Starkiller's gang. We have him as a protagonist, Juno as the love interest, Proxy as the droid and comic relief, and finally General Coda serving as a mentor figure. The Force Unleashed begins not with Starkiller, but with players taking control of Darth Vader. Set only a few months after the end of Episode 3, Vader is on the hunt for Kento Merrick, a Jedi who survived Order 66. The trope of surviving Jedi was less popular during the development of the game, but now with plenty of media set between episodes 3 and 4, we seem to keep digging up more Jedi who survive the execution order. Vader is accompanied by an Imperial invasion fleet, and the scale of the battle feels massive here. The team at LucasArts did a great job showing the unstoppable power of the Imperial fleet. Just as you'd expect, Darth Vader is a slow yet unstoppable force who makes short work of any enemy soldier that stands in his path. A lifetime of trauma has left Vader's body scarred and slowed in his cumbersome state. However, he has already established himself as a legendary menace, which is again in contrast to Starkiller, who is much more agile than his master and has yet to prove himself. Kashyyyk sets the tone of the game by letting players bully enemies with Vader and understanding the level of power Starkiller will be striving for by the end of the game. It doesn't take Vader long before he finds his target and defeats Kento Merrick in an easy boss battle. Before offing Kento, Vader presses him as he senses an individual much more attuned to the Force nearby. Kento is reluctant to give Vader any information, and to Vader's surprise, he has his lightsaber snatched from his hand by Kento's son, Galen. Vader kills Kento, and to conceal the discovery of Galen, he murders all nearby Imperial soldiers. Maybe Vader was sad about his lost potential as a father, and saw Galen as a perfect opportunity to raise his own son. In the behind-the-scenes footage, it was stated by Sam Witwer, Starkiller's actor, that Galen was envisioned as a what-if version of Luke had he turned to the dark side. From here, we fade into the present, with a fully mature Galen ready to execute his master's will. Galen Merrick adopts the name Starkiller, which is a callback to Anakin Starkiller, the protagonist from a rough draft of the first Star Wars movie. To test Starkiller, Vader sends him across the galaxy, hunting down surviving Jedi. Before departing on the first mission, we get to experience Starkiller's friendship with Proxy, and his first run-in with his new pilot, Juno Eclipse. Juno is an elite pilot handpicked by Vader, and Starkiller immediately develops a crush on her.
Proxy.
Yes, why are we whispering?
Shh, who's that?
Yes. Your new pilot has finally arrived, Master.
His initial boyish demeanor around her is cute and relatable. It also sets the tone of how their relationship will pan out in the future. It's probably no coincidence that Juno was assigned to the unsocialized Galen, as it's likely he would fall for her, giving Vader leverage against him in the future. Starkiller's first target is General Ron Coda, a Jedi Master who staged several attacks on Imperial sites and is now striking a shipyard. Merrick cuts his way through Imperials and Coda's men alike before dueling the Jedi Master, who's disappointed he was only able to draw a boy after months of attacks, when his real focus was getting Vader's attention. In their duel, Starkiller starts to overwhelm Coda before the two lock blades, and Coda senses he will become Starkiller's master one day. During this clairvoyant moment, Starkiller overpowers Coda and blinds him before throwing him out into space. Upon Starkiller's return to Vader, he is assigned to another Jedi target, and players learn that the two are plotting to overthrow the Emperor, or so Vader wants them to believe. These first few levels of the game are some of the best, as it has players constantly moving through varied worlds and environments, from the lush green landscapes of Kashyyyk to the scrapyard that is Raxus Prime. Each of these first 4 levels are inhabited by unique groups of enemies, which makes visiting them more interesting. Every mission after the initial few is filled with Imperial soldiers or reused enemies, as Starkiller makes 2 trips to both Raxus Prime and Felucia, with the second trip to each of these planets being less interesting than the initial one. Starkiller's next stop is the trash heap Raxus Prime, where he takes down Kazdan Paratus, who's recreated the Jedi Temple out of scrap in his degraded mental state. Following this, the final test is Jedi Master Shaak Ti. Located on Felucia, Shaak Ti hides with her apprentice Maris Brood. As Starkiller arrives, Shaak Ti sends Brood into hiding, feeling his presence. It's not long after this that Starkiller confronts her in battle. This was a particularly memorable boss fight, as there's a Sarlacc in the background of this boss fight, and you can throw Shaak Ti into there, and there's some interactions with it during the QTE events. Once again, Starkiller is able to slay another Jedi, but before she passes away, Shaak Ti warns Starkiller he is little more than a slave and foreshadows that Sith always betray each other. After each target is killed, we see the remorse growing within Starkiller, but for now, he remains obedient to Vader. Having proven himself capable, Starkiller reunites with his master in person, only to be stabbed in the back as the Emperor enters the room. Darth Sidious gives Vader a verbal lashing before making him strike Starkiller down. Vader follows the Emperor's orders, but opts to throw Galen into space so he can recover his body. A droid scoops up Galen and brings him to a medical facility to resuscitate him. It's here where Vader plants the seeds into Galen's mind for building a rebel army. This army would serve to distract the Emperor so the two can overthrow him. This whole encounter is a facade to further Starkiller's trust in Vader while having him start his true purpose. Up to this point in the game, Vader's intentions have seemed true. He must harbor some hatred for Sidious given what the man has done to his life, and the Sith are always plotting to overthrow each other. Despite Vader telling Starkiller to sever all ties to his past, Galen makes his way through the Imperial facility he's in to save Juno, before the two escape with Proxy aboard the Rogue Shadow. At this point, Juno believes that Galen has left the Empire behind, but little do they both know he is following the Emperor's plan. As his first step to build a rebel army, Starkiller goes in search for General Coda, and finds him blinded and treating his depression in a cantina. Coda helps Starkiller learn more about the Force and a job he can perform to get on good terms with the rebellious senator. This job has Starkiller traveling to Kashyyyk, which looks much different this time around as it's shrouded in the veil of night and has a much larger Imperial presence than before. While searching the planet, Galen encounters his old home and finds the Force ghost of his father inside. Kento Merrick regrets his inability to protect his son before disappearing. Galen does search for more information regarding his father, but this doesn't occur until the Jedi Temple DLC. This DLC is separate from the base campaign, but it takes place right before the final mission. While searching Kashyyyk, Starkiller finds Princess Leia Organa, who's being held to control her adoptive father, Senator Bail Organa. Leia escapes, but sends Starkiller to prove himself as a true Jedi by destroying a Skyhook, a device that is shuttling Wookiees off-world. Starkiller abides, and you can tell he feels a sense of satisfaction from helping the local population here. Between seeing his father again and working with those who stand against the Empire, Galen is beginning to question his place in the galaxy more. Unfortunately for Starkiller, Coda discloses Bail Organa disappeared while searching for Shaak Ti on Felucia. Bail wanted her aid in freeing Leia, but instead was taken hostage by Maris Brood, who is keeping him as something to trade in the case that Darth Vader finds her. It doesn't take Starkiller long to locate Bail and take down Maris Brood, who he's tempted to execute as she's become influenced by the dark side. Brood convinces Merrick to let her flee the planet, as Felucia has a corrupting nature about it. With Bail Organa safe, Galen tries to convince him to rally the rebels, but Organa states they need more supplies and courage to go to war. Galen contacts Vader to find a suitable target to rally the rebels, and is pointed towards the Imperial shipyard above Raxus Prime. The conflict within Starkiller is growing as he enjoys the company of his new companions far more than Vader. To make things worse, Juno was also eavesdropping on the conversation and scolds Starkiller for his loyalty to the man who has done so much damage to both of them. She emphasizes that soon he'll need to make a decision about his future. Galen heads back to Raxus Prime to deal with the Star Destroyer orbiting the planet, and during his mission there, he is ambushed by Proxy, who makes his final attempt to complete his programming. Proxy mimics Darth Maul and various other Jedi as he tries to kill his master one last time. Seeing Maul here is great, as Sam Witwer, Starkiller's actor, has become the primary voice actor for Darth Maul across the animated shows and other games. Witwer also voice acts Emperor Palpatine in The Force Unleashed, and has played him many other times since the game's release. After fending off Proxy and destroying the shipyard above Raxus Prime, a Star Destroyer is dispatched to deal with Starkiller. Left with few options and encouraged by Coda, Starkiller reaches out with the Force, and with great effort succeeds in crashing the ship into Raxus Prime in one of the game's most iconic scenes. I don't think I've seen a Force feat before or since this that was at such a scale. Before escaping Raxus Prime, Starkiller retrieves Proxy, whose central programming was damaged by the impact of the ship. Proxy regrets his central objective is gone, as Starkiller laughs this off and rescues his friend. With the rebels rallied by Starkiller's deed on Raxus Prime, the group assembles and begins to forge the Rebel Alliance. Mere moments after their declaration of rebellion, the Empire and Vader arrive to capture all key members of the movement. Vader congratulates Starkiller, then thrashes him once again. The truth is finally revealed as Vader has been lying from the very beginning.
I lied, as I have from the very beginning.
Starkiller was merely a pawn used to root out the enemies of the Empire so they could be executed. At this moment, I was curious if Starkiller was really being used to find the rebels all along, or if Sidious had Vader change his plans when he stumbled upon Starkiller earlier. In the light side ending and the novelization of the game, it stated that Darth Sidious was behind the plan for Starkiller all along, which fits right along with his conniving schemes. It's in the realm of possibility that Vader would raise an apprentice to overthrow Sidious, as Sith tend to do, but when Starkiller questions Vader on overthrowing the Emperor, he plainly states he never planned on doing it with Galen, implying that perhaps Vader was searching for Luke to help him rule the galaxy instead. Before Vader can kill Starkiller, Proxy runs in wearing the guise of Obi-Wan and sacrifices himself, giving Galen the time he needs to retreat. Now identifying as a Jedi, Galen senses that Coda was taken to a massive space station, which is none other than the original Death Star. Juno drops off Galen at the Death Star as the two share their final words together. With a parting kiss, Galen sets off to right the wrongs he put into motion. Now adorned in Jedi robes, Starkiller makes his way through the construction of the Death Star, and before he can free the rebels, he must fight Vader. Stronger than ever before, Galen is able to defeat his old master and is egged on by Darth Sidious to strike him down. Coda attempts to stop Sidious, but is pinned by the Emperor's Force Lightning, presenting the players with a choice: save Coda and the rebels in the game's canonical ending, or duel Vader once again and finally kill him, pushing Galen back towards the dark side. Given the events in the game, it really only makes sense for Galen to save Coda and the others, as through the course of the game he has broken free from the influence of the dark side. Following the decision to save the rebels, Galen fights the Emperor himself, who tries to convince Galen to join him. After beating the Emperor, Galen is able to restrain himself from killing Palpatine, who lashes out at Coda with more Force Lightning. Galen intercepts the attack and holds the Emperor at bay while Coda and the other rebels escape on Galen's ship. As Galen moves towards the Emperor, their hands meet and a massive Force explosion erupts, knocking everyone nearby away. After the smoke fades, it's revealed that Galen did not survive the explosion, but the Emperor and Vader have. Upon his death, Galen has become a martyr for the Rebel Alliance and become more powerful than he ever was in life. The Emperor bemoans the outcome of his plans and insists that Vader must be ruthless in killing the rebels, as at least they know their identities now. Cutting back to the rebels, they officially form the Rebel Alliance, swearing not to let Galen's sacrifice go in vain. In the final scene of the game, Coda discloses he knew Galen's identity all along. Juno can't help but wonder why he would help Galen then. Coda states that Starkiller always held on to one bright spot in his heart, and that was Juno. This ending put a nice bow on the whole story, and makes it a key connecting point between episodes 3 and 4, even though this story isn't canon. Backing up to the ending decision, if you instead decide to fight Vader to the death, you'll battle him once more. After killing his former master, Starkiller heads towards the Emperor, who is torturing General Coda. He asks Starkiller to prove himself as a true Sith Lord and cut off all connections to the Jedi. Unable to strike his master down, Starkiller turns his blade on Darth Sidious, who asserts he has doomed himself and his friends with this action. With that, Sidious throws Galen through a window, exposing that the rebel leaders have been executed. Galen, incapable of accepting this outcome, screams as the Emperor grabs his ship and throws it into him. Fading to the aftermath, Galen is now supported by cybernetics just like Darth Vader. The Emperor has his medical droids putting the finishing touches on Starkiller as he declares Starkiller will be used for a few tasks, then tossed aside once a more suitable replacement can be found, just like Vader before him. Following this ending, there are 2 missions that have Starkiller working as the Emperor's assassin. Sith Lord Starkiller also has a great selection of outfits to pick from. Probably my favorite armor overall is a Dark Lord armor. which is reminiscent of Darth Vader's armor, and also has Starkiller repping the blades of foes he's defeated. The story of The Force Unleashed helps elevate the game and holds up better than I thought it would. The game fits right in with other Star Wars stories and retains many of the key themes the franchise is known for. Following the release of The Force Unleashed, 3 DLC missions were sold, helping to flesh out the experience even further. Sadly, your profile from the campaign can't be imported here, bringing along your progress, but the Starkiller you control here is already fully powered up. While these are some of the most enjoyable levels in the game, these missions are not long, as each clocks in at under 30 minutes. In the first DLC mission, Galen travels to the Jedi Temple on Coruscant. This mission takes place somewhere before the end of the game, where Coda and the others are captured. The decaying temple makes for one of the most interesting environments to explore if you remember it from the prequel trilogy. Galen ends up deep in the Jedi Temple, searching for information on his father, when he finds a holocron. Through it, Kento Merrick encourages Galen to take control of his own destiny and face the Jedi trials. A few of these trials are simple puzzles and platforming challenges, but they make use of the mechanics that already exist in the game and are a breath of fresh air compared to fighting it non-stop. In the final trial, Starkiller confronts his inner demons, personified as a fallen version of himself. Exhausted after clearing the trials, Galen returns to the Rogue Shadow, unable to find the information he was hoping for. Now swapping over to the Sith ending, the Tatooine and Hoth DLC missions let players become truly evil and butcher a couple characters from the original trilogy. These missions play out as a sort of distorted version of that trilogy. Tatooine is the first mission chronologically and has Starkiller searching for R2-D2 and C-3PO. Starkiller meets with Jabba, as he's one of the only reliable sources of information on the planet. At Jabba's palace, his protocol droid slips up and gives Starkiller the information he's searching for, just as Jabba drops him into the Rancor pit, which should feel pretty familiar. After slaying the Rancor, Starkiller makes his way out of Jabba's palace and discovers the remnants of Proxy, who aids his master one final time before being left to rot.
Thank you, Proxy.
Certainly, Master. It was so good to work.
In pursuit of the droids, Galen is intercepted by Boba Fett, who provides little challenge for the cold-blooded Sith assassin. Just as Starkiller arrives in Mos Eisley, Obi-Wan Kenobi attempts to buy the Millennium Falcon the time it needs to escape. Starkiller brutally murders Obi-Wan by throwing him into the exhaust of the Falcon, but Obi-Wan immediately respawns as a Force Ghost for round 2 of the fight. Starkiller exercises Obi-Wan's spirit just as the Falcon takes off. Fortunately, he's able to plant a tracking device on the ship, leading us into the Hoth DLC mission. As you might expect, this mission takes place during the beginning of Episode 5 and has Starkiller hunting for Luke Skywalker. There's less story to discuss in this mission, as for most of it, players will be cutting through Wampas and Rebel soldiers. Starkiller is able to catch up to Luke and fight him once, but Luke manages to barely escape the encounter. With the Millennium Falcon and Luke's friends within Starkiller's grasp, Luke is forced to step up for a second battle. Starkiller presses Luke to his breaking point, compelling him to adopt the dark side to save his friends.
Now I will destroy you, Skywalker, as I destroyed your father.
No!
Luke's dialogue is a bit goofy here, as he sounds kind of like a middle schooler that's roleplaying a fallen Jedi.
Ben was wrong. The dark side is stronger.
Having successfully turned Luke, Starkiller claims him as his own apprentice. Now, there's no story following this plotline further in the game, but I'm curious if Starkiller plans to use Luke to take down the Emperor with him, which is a very original idea, or if he would turn young Skywalker over to Sidious, who would probably replace Starkiller with Luke in this scenario. Overall, the DLC missions are some of the most entertaining in the game, and they really help flesh out Starkiller a bit more and let players experience some fun what-if scenarios. Games, particularly licensed ones, released during the 6th and 7th generation, often released to a wide variety of platforms, including popular previous generation consoles and handhelds. It was an interesting time, as external developers would often create wholly new versions of the source material as it couldn't be ported to other platforms. The Force Unleashed follows this trend, as the flagship version was developed internally by LucasArts for the Xbox 360, PS3, and PC. This is the version you've seen in the video up to this point, but to sell more copies of the game, it was also released on the Wii, PS2, PSP, Nintendo DS, iPhone, and more. While the same general story plays out in each of the games, they play quite differently from LucasArts' product. Both versions, for the Nintendo platforms, leverage their unique control methods in combat, The Wii version was handled by Chrome Studio and made use of the motion-controlled Wiimote to swing Starkiller's lightsaber, while force abilities were executed with a nunchuck. This version was later ported to the Nintendo Switch, which allowed for more traditional inputs while also offering motion controls. The PS2 and PSP version were also developed by Chrome Studio and were just like the Wii version, sans motion controls. Developer N-Space handled the DS version, which moved most of the combat inputs onto the device's touchscreen, and despite the DS's meager power, the game still rendered in 3D. Lastly, a version of the game was released for phones and later the iPhone. Playing this version today is probably the most difficult as it's no longer available on the App Store. If you're curious about a more in-depth comparison of the various versions, I'd recommend checking out Philander's great video covering this topic, but make sure to stick around for a bit longer, as at long last, it's time to rank the game. Assigning a specific ranking to The Force Unleashed was actually pretty difficult for me. While there's no doubt that the game delivers on its promise of letting you kick enemies' ass with the Force, the game falls short in its combat, which lacks the depth of its competitors. The intricate and often wild physics system helps the simple combat out here, but I was still left wanting more when it comes to a positive feedback loop for the players. At its worst, The Force Unleashed will have you slogging through slow menus and waiting too long to respawn after dying in a clunky encounter, but fortunately, the story and characters here are definitely worth playing the game for alone. After beating The Force Unleashed for the first time in many years, I had the game locked in at a D, but through playing the DLC and reviewing the footage here, the story really stuck with me, and I'm sure I'll remember it for years to come, so that's why I'm giving the game a C ranking. Coming back to replay The Force Unleashed for the first time in over a decade was well worth the time, but I'm afraid I probably won't feel the same way about its sequel, which I had more negative thoughts towards the first time I played it. And if you made it all the way to the end here, thanks for watching the video. Give it a thumbs up and maybe drop a comment below if you have something to say, or subscribe if you like these videos and want to see more. It really helps to get the video out to more people. And once again, thanks for watching. I do all the editing and writing here, so it takes a while, but the end product's usually worth it. Have a good one.